So I think we'll go ahead and get started. You're very welcome again to the Tackling the Water Crisis webinar this evening. We're having this joint webinar between the Irish Environmental Network, the IEN, and the Sustainable Water Network, SWAN, as we're coming to a crucial time for Ireland's water environment, a time where the Environmental Protection Agency is telling us that half of our rivers, lakes, and estuaries are in an unhealthy state, and the quality of our water is declining. It is indeed a time where Ireland is facing a water crisis, and we need to tackle it. Also at this time, the government has released its draft River Basin Management Plan to bring our water bodies up to a healthy state or good status by 2027, as set out in the key EU legislation, the Water Framework Directive. So with this webinar, we wanted to give the opportunity to the government the opportunity to present on this vital plan for fixing this crisis, and to provide an opportunity for attendees this evening to learn about and input to the plan to make it as strong and as representative as possible. Firstly, we'll be hearing from Minister Malcolm Noonan, who will introduce the plan itself and the importance of taking part in the public consultation on it. We'll then have a presentation from David Flynn, Principal Advisor for Water in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. He leads the water team in the department, who has responsibility for the plan. David will give a more detailed overview of the plan itself, what it's trying to achieve, and how to put in a submission to the public consultation process. As two networks that represent the leading environmental NGOs in the country, we also wanted to allow you to hear our views on the plan and whether we think it will work. Sinead O'Brien, coordinator of SWAN, will give the civil society perspective on this. SWAN is a network of 25 of Ireland's leading local and national environmental groups, working together to protect Ireland's rivers, lakes, bays, seas, and groundwaters. It's very much a sister network to the IEN, of which I'm the CEO. My name is Karen Ciesielski, by the way. Our 32 members focus on issues ranging from environmental education, forestry, climate action policy, to direct conservation and biodiversity restoration. We're fortunate to have many of our collective members joining us this evening, and you're all very welcome. After the two presentations, we'll be providing you with a chance to ask the questions that you want answered on the plan and on the wider water crisis itself, with a questions and answers session. Finally, we'll end the webinar outlining the next steps for you to get involved at this crucial time with SWAN's campaign. So without further ado, we'll get started by welcoming the Minister of State for Heritage and Electoral Reform, Malcolm Noonan. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen, and good evening, everybody. And I want to firstly start by thanking SWAN and the Irish Environmental Network for hosting this webinar on Ireland's draft River Basin Management Plan. And it's great to see many people here on the call. And I know, as you do, that the best way to protect and to improve our coast, estuaries, groundwater, rivers, lakes, and streams is by working together. So I'm delighted that you've asked me here this evening, and our fantastic officials from my department to take part in this important event here this evening. I'll be staying with you for as much as I can. We have voting in the Dáil this evening, so it won't be as soon as the gong goes off, I may have to exit swiftly, but I'll try and stay for as much of the event as I can. The importance of protecting and improving Ireland's water resources cannot be underestimated. Having good, secure water supplies, comprehensive wastewater services, and clean waters are vital for protecting public health, supporting economic development, and protecting our environment, including aquatic biodiversity. We're talking to lots of groups at the moment as we develop the third RBMP. We recently held a webinar with 240 attendees, and again, they were engaging in a series of meetings with An Fóra An Fóra has a really important role and is doing fantastic work. Anyone who knows me knows I value meaningful participation, and I think it's vitally important that platforms like An Fóra are well connected to the systems that govern our waterways. While there is some good news in these areas identified in the second cycle plan for targeted measures, overall water quality in Ireland is declining, primarily due to pollution from agriculture and from wastewater discharges. The physical health of natural waters are also affected by siltation, drainage, and barriers like weirs and dams. These pressures are further complicated by the uncertainty arising from climate change. The situation is clearly urgent and requires collective action to halt and reverse the deterioration. These environmental pressures are putting Ireland's clean and green image at risk, as well as livelihoods that depend directly on this image. Meeting the environmental objectives of the Water Framework Directive will be very challenging. However, together we can do it. The recently published draft plan describes a number of proposed measures needed to protect and improve Ireland's water environment, covering rivers, lakes, groundwater, estuaries, and coastal waters. The plan reflects the high-level environmental ambition enshrined in the 2020 Programme for Government, Our Shared Future. In particular, there is a strong focus on delivering multiple environmental policy objectives, not just for water quality, but also benefits for biodiversity and climate adaptation and mitigation. As you can appreciate, both of these depend strongly on effective water management. Supporting the overall premise of putting the right measure in the right place, the other key principles adopted in the development of the draft plan include: the third cycle plan will have a high-level ambition encompassing all water bodies with clear strategies to protect those that are still good status or above, and to restore water bodies that are less than good status. I think we're hitting a crunch point in terms of water quality. We have the strongest mandate we've ever had to address these challenges, and we need to see that reflected in the River Basin Management Plans. Our ambition is high, it can go higher still. Catchment plans were put in place for each of the 46 hydrometric catchments as sub-plans to the national plan. Building over time into fully integrated catchment management plans, the initial level of detail to be included in these plans will be decided based on templates produced by LawPro in consultation with stakeholders. These plans will also provide a basis against which to assess implementation of measures through annual reports. And I would really like to see a clear plan for public participation in decision making here. Communities are vital to this work, and their involvement should be real and should be meaningful. On that topic, there will be an increased level of coordination and collaborative work by all implementing bodies at national, regional, and at catchment levels, making optimal use of existing and enhanced governance structures and resources. And this is really something that I am very excited to see included. The draft plan sets out over 100 proposed measures, and its publication was an important milestone in giving stakeholders the opportunity to get involved. However, the real challenge now is to work collaboratively and effectively across government, public bodies, and key sectors, creating synergies that will ultimately scale up the success achieved to date to deliver on national objectives. By sharing your knowledge and ideas at events like this, you will be helping to deliver a strengthened River Basin Management Plan to cover the period up to 2027 and shape the overall management of the water environment in Ireland. While the making of these plans requires a considerable amount of technical expertise, it also requires the knowledge, understanding, and views of those people who use water in their everyday lives. So no matter what your connection with the water environment, we really welcome your views, your ideas, and hopefully strong support in implementing the measures required to meet our goal of delivering excellent water services and water quality. Gurb Mahagat.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now I'd like to hand you over to David Flynn, Principal Advisor for Water in the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, to give an overview of the draft plan. In his role, David has responsibility for leading on Ireland's Water Framework Directive planning process, including overseeing the preparation and coordination of implementation of River Basin Management Plans and the associated programs of measures. Over to you, David. You're very welcome this evening. I'd also like to say, in terms of questions, as they may come to you throughout the presentations this evening, if you could please use the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll be kind of gathering them later for the Q&A session. Also, I believe you can also like other people's and vote for other people's questions if they've got a similar one to your own. Thanks so much. Over to you, David.
Karen, thank you so much. Can I just check you can hear me okay? Yep, perfect. Okay, thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Minister. Yes, so look, as Karen pointed out, I'm going to give a short overview of, maybe in a little bit more detail, of the plan itself. I hope everyone has had the opportunity to have a look at the draft. It's been out now since September. 6 months seemed like a long time when we launched the draft, but it's very quickly coming towards the end of the formal consultation period at the end of March. So thanks to both SWAN and IEN, two organisations that I know well and have engaged with over many years, just for the opportunity to come and talk to you this evening. And really it's about explaining the detail of the plan and you know what we see as necessary. But more importantly, we're in listening mode to hear your ideas, your challenges, you know, to the plan, and you know what you would like to see incorporated into the final version of the plan. So I'll just move on here. Just as a very brief overview, just to situate ourselves, this is our third cycle of planning in Ireland. So the first one was in 2009, then we had what was due in 2015, but was actually published in 2018. And now we're working on the plan that will cover 2022 to 2027. And of course, as most people know, there is a very key date in 2027 where the directive had envisioned that Europe's water would largely be at good water status by that stage, and a lot of the exemptions and allowances and I suppose room expire by 2027. So there is real pressure on for all of us here in Ireland, but right across Europe, to put in a big effort in this third cycle to get our waters to where they need to be by that date. In terms of the planning process itself, it's relatively straightforward in terms of you identify the significant pressures, you look at the impacts that they're causing on water status, you make a view as to what the water status is and the trends that are involved there, what water bodies are at risk, and then determine a program of measures to address that. And that cycle continues in 6-year cycles up until 2027 for the implementation phase, and certainly on beyond that in terms of protecting and again restoring where necessary. Right around Europe, our fellow member states are at the exact same task. All of these plans are due in December 2021. I took this off the Commission website this morning, so this shows the status at the moment. So as far as I know, none of the plans have yet been adopted, finally adopted and notified to the Commission. But you can see the member states in yellow have completed their consultation phase and should very shortly, if they haven't done so already, make their plans. We're in the next cohort, along with Spain, Belgium, and Slovenia, in terms of we're in the middle of our consultation phase at the moment to end at the end of March. And then you can see there's a number of countries have yet to commence. So we're expecting an update of this in this map in the next month, by the end of next month. In terms of water quality, look, the Minister has set it out there. We're in a stark and I suppose very urgent situation where only half of our water bodies are meeting the required standards. And I suppose just to focus in on a couple of areas that might help put a bit of detail on that issue for the moment, I wanted to just highlight two areas from the recent EPA report on water indicators from last year. So first, here in the middle, if you can see, is the biological quality of rivers. So you can see that there was 405 water bodies showed an improvement, but 230 showed a disimprovement in their biological. So this isn't status, just their biological quality. And really the message to take from that is that any improvements, and we are seeing improvements in some areas, are almost being entirely wiped out by disimprovements in other areas. In terms of, I suppose, one of the most concerning trends, and I know the text is quite small here, but I will make these slides available for people afterwards, is the increase in nitrogen and phosphorus losses from land-based activities to water. And while the numbers aren't necessarily important here, you can see the trend over time is increasing over the last period. And the numbers there are fairly stark in terms of the EPA's report. So 26% increase in nitrogen and a 35% increase in phosphorus loads, at our estuary. So looking at those catchments, the actual mass of nitrogen and phosphorus being lost as an increase over the 2012 to 2014 period in comparison to the most recent period. So again, I think it's really the main message to take is that the situation is in need of urgent action. In terms of where that action is required, the most significant pressures are set out on the table. And again, look, there's a lot of detail on these slides. They will be available afterwards. Agriculture is by far and away the most significant issue, not entirely a surprise given it is our largest land use in the country. But there are 1,000 water bodies that are at risk of not achieving the required standards within the required timelines as set out there. And in terms of agriculture, we're really, I suppose, primarily talking about excess nutrients lost from land to water, both nitrogen in the more freer flowing areas and then phosphorus in the heavier soil areas. Hydromorphology is the next most significant, and I'll go into a bit more detail in later slides on what these actually involve and what responses we're proposing to these. Forestry and then urban wastewater are complete the top 4 issues that I suppose need most immediate responses. Just a little bit more detail on that. So on the left-hand side slide is a graphic from the EPA showing the number of surface water bodies at risk right around the country. So that's a graphical representation of the previous table. And then on the right-hand side is a breakdown of the agricultural measures for the 3rd cycle. So the blue areas are areas with phosphorus runoff risk. And then the amber or orange areas are the areas that have free-flowing soils with nitrate risks. So look, there's a lot of information there on water quality. There's also an awful lot of information available on the EPA's catchment website. The link is here, it's catchments.ie. You can drill down to any river or groundwater body in Ireland, or all the water bodies in Ireland. Click on that, you can see the at risk, current status, the status over previous cycles, and all of the data that's there. It's fully available. It's a really great resource with a huge amount of information available there for people. So in terms of us responding then in the form of the River Basin Management Plan, what are our areas of focus, or what are we proposing as areas of focus? Well, first and foremost is to continue a very strong investment in urban and rural water services. So there is a very large task ahead of both Irish Water, but also in rural water services, to make up a compliance gap that has built up over a number of years, to respond to increases in population and changes in population settlement patterns, but also to respond to climate change. So there is a need for a continued and very strong investment for the foreseeable future in urban and rural water services. The second is measures to protect and restore rivers, estuaries, lakes, groundwater. So reducing that diffuse nutrient pollution that I spoke about there, both phosphorus and nitrogen, with different measures required for each in different areas of the country, so that the right measure in the right place. And there's a number of mechanisms through the nitrates regulations, through CAP, and through other more specific projects to deal with those. Dealing with wastewater discharges, I mentioned, and then addressing obstacles and obsolete barriers to migrating fish within rivers is another area of focus for us in this plan. Third area of focus, or just at a macro level, is the work of legal and institutional transformation. So there's been a huge amount of transformation in the water sector over the last number of years with the transformation of Irish Water. That needs to continue. We're also doing a resource review of local authorities in terms of the resources that are required for them to discharge their duties in water protection and restoration, and indeed the support by LawPro in that work. So I'm just going to turn at some of the more pressing issues that are causing problems. So first and foremost is agriculture. So as I mentioned, we're in the middle of finalising what we believe is a much stronger and we hope more effective nitrates action programme. We're in the middle of discussions with the European Commission at the moment on finalising that. It's going through some final assessment processes here domestically, and we'd hope to have that in place in early March and vote of the EU Commission on a derogation application for the country in mid-March. So by the end of March, we'll have a much stronger nitrates action programme in place. We also have the recently announced CAP Green Architecture, which is with the EU Commission at the moment for assessment, and included in that was, I suppose, much stronger measures around the protection of water, around the right measure in the right place, and a new proposal for a results-based payment scheme under the ACM mechanisms. In terms of just looking at nitrogen in agriculture, it's really around source control. So it's really about ensuring that nitrogen is used where it's needed, precision agriculture, reducing the amount of chemical nitrogen being used on land, the use of mixed swards, and ensuring good soil health and good soil chemistry. So it's really around source control measures is our focus there. What the EPA have done as well recently, and I'm sure this is not news to anyone here, is produce these pollution impact potential maps, so PIP maps, and this really looks at both phosphorus and nitrogen in much more detail at a almost a field level, looking at the risk that can arise at a very high level of resolution. And I think this is going to be a really useful tool in terms of both planning and precision agriculture, but also in terms of monitoring and enforcement of the next nitrates action program. In terms of phosphorus, it's more about overland flow and pathway interception. And again, there's been a lot of work done by the EPA, but the EPA and TAGASC have been involved in this as well, around identifying, again, at a very high level of resolution, these pollution impact potential pathways and areas that we can now microlocate interception measures, which will hopefully reduce the impact and the pollution from phosphorus in these areas with an overland flow risk. So again, tools that have only relatively recently become available, but I think are hugely powerful if we use them in the right way. Hydromorphology is after agriculture, the next most, I suppose, significant pressure that is putting water bodies at risk. And this is really about healthy, free-flowing rivers. So as the Minister mentioned earlier, looking at obsolete weirs, looking at weirs that are a barrier to fish migration, are there modifications or even removal of those weirs that can be considered to, I suppose, ensure that the status of the water bodies are protected, but also there's interaction with the biodiversity strategy and potential targets for Ireland under that strategy. So that's a programme that we're hoping to include in the final plan, and we already have initial projects underway at the Partine Dam on the Shannon and in Anacotty as well, and some other areas that we're looking at closely for that. But there are a huge number of structures that need to be assessed, about 70,000, and I suppose the initial view is somewhere between 2,000 and 7,000 of these need some form of modification or removal. Forestry, third most significant issue, again, it's about 223 water bodies. The types of issue, again, physical alterations, so where you're getting channelization, straightening, change away from natural functions, changes to water levels and flows, sediment loss, excess nutrients, so on and so forth. So it's really, I suppose, about improving the licensing process, but also restructuring of existing stands to increase setback distances, ensuring that any new afforestation is sensitive to water and is located in a water sensitive way and designed in a water sensitive way, which is entirely possible. And I suppose a lot of the issues here we're seeing is legacy stands of forestry. On wastewater, as I mentioned, look, it's about continuing a very strong and very significant investment in Irish water. Again, this year, the government have put in very high levels of investment into water, both to deal with drinking water and urban wastewater. We also have I suppose, as well as water quality issues and compliance issues, we have social needs that we need to account for in terms of housing for all. We also have climate change and other issues that need to be dealt with in the water system. But we are seeing progress. We are seeing the number of large urban areas non-compliant with EU directives is improving, and the same on drinking water. We're seeing the improvements in the RAL, but there's still, by no means is it a work, is the work complete. There's a huge amount of work still remaining on this side of things. So we foresee a very strong need for investment will continue for many years ahead. I'll just mention very quickly, and it's something maybe that we might come back to the group at some stage to talk about, is our new Waters of Life project. And Goggin, previous of Limerick City and County Council, has come across to the department as project manager for this Waters of Life IP project, which will look at 6 different catchments with high status objective water bodies in them, looking at, I suppose, taking measures, including results-based payments, as to protect and to improve these areas to achieve high status. As you'll see from the data in the draft River Basin Management Plan, I think one of the really, I suppose, most worrying trends is the continued loss of our high status waters, and these are the most pristine areas, and also act as biodiversity reservoirs for the downstream areas. So it's really, really important that we protect and where possible restore these areas. So we're very excited about this project. It's at early days yet, and we'd hope to officially launch it in the coming weeks. Just very briefly mention a document as well about urban runoff. So I suppose urban runoff from urban areas is we're seeing, I suppose, becoming a more significant issue. Downstream of urban areas, impacts on bathing waters and so on and so forth. We've produced interim guidance on nature-based solution to the management of rainwater in urban areas. So if you haven't seen a copy of it yet, I'd urge you to have a look at it. We're hoping to finalise that into a national implementation strategy to support both Water Framework Directive, but also national policy objectives in the National Policy Planning Framework. Finally, I'll just mention, I'm not going to go into detail in this, but I can do in the discussion. I suppose one aspect that isn't, I suppose, strongly dealt with in the directive, or there isn't a direction given in the directive about how to deal with it, but adapting to climate change and taking account of the impact of climate change is I suppose, a challenge, given that we have to predict out into the future. And climate adaptation is very much a problem of water management. So either too much or too little water in various different areas. It also, of course, has an impact on water quality, particularly on the issues that we're looking at here. So in terms of, obviously, for phosphorus overland flow, any change in rainfall patterns has an impact on that. But also on nitrogen loss from land, again, is very heavily dependent on the climate and weather patterns that we're seeing. So I think the climate aspects of the plan will be an important one to keep an eye on, and it's obviously longer than a 6-year, the 6-year cycles of the plan. So I think it's one that will feature more and more in future plans. In terms of public engagement, and this is part of what we're doing here this evening, is we in the department, and we're delighted to have the Minister of State with us as well this evening, is to hear concerns directly from people, to collect information on problems that you're seeing in your context, and also your experience, and to collect new ideas. We're certainly not the holders of all the knowledge on this. We very much want to hear from people. We're out talking to people through on Fórum Uisce, directly with SWAN, as we are here this evening, and Irish Environmental Network, but also directly with members of the public in terms of events run by the local authorities' water programme. We're also hoping to have both Minister Noonan and Mr. O'Brien meet with on Fórum Uisce as we close out the consultation period later in March. So that was it from me. I'm going to stop sharing and then hand it back to you, Karen. I hope you could hear and see all that clearly.
Yes, we could. Thanks very much,
Thanks.
David. And I'm sure attendees this evening would really welcome the slides as well from the presentation. So thank you for
No
agreeing to share those. So I do have a question in the Q&A, and I'd like to, Sinead, if you don't mind, just ask Minister Noonan to respond, just in the event that you might need to go for the vote in the Dáil. There's a question for you. So it is, Minister Noonan, you clearly have these matters close to your heart, and you're blessed with quality civil servants such as David Flynn, as well as the scientific competency of EPA catchments, etc. Given the urgency of these matters, why is water not higher on the political agenda? And who or what are the chief obstacles to enhancing the prioritization of water in the wider political arena?
Thanks, Mark, for that question. And yeah, absolutely, it's really important. And thanks for acknowledging David and our great team. They are really fantastic, really dedicated people. And I suppose in terms of the political prioritization of it, I certainly know it probably hasn't been great in the past. It's in terms of funding water infrastructure, and but I do think that within this programme for government, we have had a renewed commitment across a number of interrelated areas, and I alluded to it in my opening comments about the interrelated actions around climate, biodiversity, and water, and land use. So that I think the programme for government outlines a very clear commitment in this area, and certainly it could be more. We've admitted that, and I do think that as well as when we were putting the government together and having what were very protracted negotiations around forming the government, it was very useful to have the engagement from the ENGOs like IEN and SWAN to help into that process, and I think that helped informed to achieve these high level ambitions that we have, and again I would continue to say that engagement is necessary throughout all of these processes and all of these actions that we're taking. So I think that's been really useful. Civil society has played a part, the ENGOs have played a huge part, and climate activists have played a part as well. So it's probably coming together a lot of very positive pressure, plus a political commitment at very high level. And I'll say this for Taoiseach as well, because he has demonstrated time and time again that he remains very politically committed to the water issue in Ireland, and I have to say I'm very encouraged by that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So now I'd like to ask Sinead O'Brien, the coordinator of SWAN, to speak. Sinead has worked on water policy and the Water Framework Directive for 15 years and has a unique historical perspective on progress and how, despite the best endeavours of many, we've arrived at this critical juncture. Over to you, Sinead.
Thanks very much, Karen. Just going to get this into slideshow mode. Is that visible to everybody? Yep. So thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be co-hosting this with our sister network, and we're looking forward to working more together on it into the future. So the question that we the task that we set ourselves for the evening, or at least that was set for me for my presentation, was to answer the question about whether we think the proposed plan is going to work. And then to do that, I guess we want to, I'm just setting my timer. To do that, we just want to, there's a couple of steps, I guess, in our thinking. And we want to look at the current situation, where I think David has done a very good job of setting that out for us. Then we need to just ask ourselves, if we're asking the question, is it going to work? We have to ask, well, where do we want to get to? What's our end goal? So I'm going to say a little bit about that. And then to get there, what should an effective plan look like, or what should it contain? And then I'm going to spend most of the presentation just answering the question, does the proposed plan contain that? So sneak preview, we don't think it does. Will it work? We don't think it will fully or as well as it should. And then I'm going to spend most of it talking about what's missing, and then SWAN recommending solutions to fill those gaps. So the current situation, I think I'm just presenting this again. David, I think, illustrated it very well earlier. So I'm just showing this again, I guess, just to show that, you know, everything to the right of that red line is basically unhealthy water. It's waters that are failing, you know, to pass the water framework directive test of good status. And then where do we need to get to? So what's our end goal? So I guess from our point of view, our end goal would be clean and healthy rivers, lakes, coastal waters, groundwaters, streams, etc., for people and for nature. So what exactly does healthy mean? I suppose it could mean different things to different people. And healthy for people, I think, is just it looks clean, it smells clean, it's healthy and safe for people to paddle in, to swim in, to kayak in, to stand up paddleboard in. And I think it's important to emphasize that's not just designated beaches either. We think that all our rivers and lakes should be swimmable and safe. Then from the point of view of nature, what does healthy mean? So luckily for us, we have the EU Water Framework Directive, which gives very clear definition of what healthy means. And healthy is good status, good biological, chemical and physical status. And that is a very slight, the definition is a slight deviation from very high pristine status that has little, very little or no human impacts or pressures. And so what the end goal that we want then is this definition of good status for all our waters by 2027. And critically also no deterioration from 2009 levels. There's a bit of debate about the baseline, but let's say 2009. And as you can see from David's presentation, we're already flying in the face of that because we can see, you know, significant deterioration since the last planning cycle. So then what's causing the problem? I don't think I have to labor this. David showed this graph earlier. It's, you know, it's a complex issue, catchment management. There's lots of interacting issues. And because we're having a short webinar, I'm just going to focus on the top ones: agriculture, hydromorphology, forestry, and urban wastewater, not to diminish the others. And, you know, hopefully if we have a follow-up event, we can cover those. And just to say that hydromorphology, in my mind, I always think what that is any interference with the physical or damage to the sort of physical integrity of a water body, and that usually involves a digger. So if you see a digger near a river, that's usually hydromorphological alterations. So then, to ask the question, what an effective plan should look like to get to where we want to go. And it would need to be ambitious, with targeted and funded actions to restore all our water bodies to that gold standard of a healthy state by 2027. And to do that, you need specific measures that are linked very clearly to the pressures, excuse me. And you need smart targets and measures to do that. So specific, measurable, assigned to whoever is responsible. Obviously, they have to be realistic and they have to be time bound as well. And then, you know, to answer the question, do we think that the proposed plan as it stands at the moment fits that description, and would it work? We would have to say no, we don't think it would. So now I'm going to explain why and then propose some solutions to fix the plan. So first of all, the positives. There's a lot that's good in the plan, and, you know, I can't go through it all, but here are I guess the main things that we were pleased to see. The first was, as the Minister and David mentioned, this commitment to 46 catchment management plans. And the catchment is the hydrometric unit for water, and it's all the literature says that's the unit where management has to happen. So it's great that that's happening and that there's a commitment that the public can be involved as well. There's definitely much stronger messaging and language in the plan, and I think that does reflect a stronger commitment in the programme for government that the Minister very rightly pointed out. For example, it does say in the earlier stages, parts of the plan, before we get to the measures, that it must include a programme of measures to protect and, where necessary, restore all of the water bodies so that they reach at least good status by 2027. There's a however there, though, which is when you get to the programmes and measures section, it doesn't actually explain how it's going to be done, and in fact it's acknowledged that we're not going to get there. And there's also, under a sort of slightly vague what we want to achieve part, three really good things, which is native woodland interception measures, so riparian woodlands along 2,500 kilometres of riverside. That would be really super. A minimum of 20,000 hectares of organic soil to be re-wetted, and at least 50% reduction in nitrate losses from agriculture. But again, when you get to the business end of the plan where the measures will be actually proposed, we don't see that being set out. So again, that's rather aspirational. And then the final thing we're pleased to see is proposed legislation for physical works on water bodies and on land drainage. And I'll say more about that in a coming slide. So then, I guess what's missing and what are our recommendations to fix it. So the first thing that's missing is a lack of ambition. It's more ambitious than the earlier plans, but that's starting from quite a low base. And unfortunately, of the 1,600 water bodies that are either deemed to be unhealthy or at risk of becoming unhealthy, there's only a plan to restore a proportion of those. And so only certain lucky waterways are going to be targeted, are going to have the benefit of targeted measures. It's actually unclear from the plan how many are. So there's going to be targeted work in 310 priority areas for action, but there's no indication in the plan that I can see of how many of the water bodies that are failing are actually going to have the benefit of being in those priority areas for action, and how many will be restored to a healthy state. So already we're seeing the lack of those sort of smart targets and smart measures. So our recommendation would be that there needs to be these smart measures to bring all waters up to good status by 2027. And then there is important brackets there. There are limited exemptions allowed by the directive on the basis of technical infeasibility, and some of that is described in the plan, and that's, you know, we do accept that. And once that's set out in the plan in a transparent way, that's okay, but it's the exception, it should be the exception rather than the rule. And so not just a lucky subset of waters, but all water bodies we are calling for. The second issue that I'd like to highlight is water governance and public participation. There's been a lot of work done on water governance, and there is quite a complex water governance system established over the past years. And we do welcome that in part, but still we have no one body ultimately responsible for implementation. What does that mean? It means it's very unclear where or who are making the decisions regarding the selection of measures. And this is important because it's going to be politically sometimes quite challenging. These measures, if they're implemented as they should be, are not going to be popular. And so we have to know, and it has to be transparent, where those decisions are being made and who's responsible for making them. The second issue in relation to governance is a lack of policy coherence. And I've put this in red because if you were to ask me what is the absolute nub of the issue and why this plan is not going to work, it's because it's been developed sort of aside from the big policy drivers. And in particular, I'm thinking about agriculture, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And until we have that proper coherence, this plan is going to be on the back foot. And then I already mentioned transparency in relation to public participation. Again, there's been improvement in that since the last cycle, but again, from a low base. We very much welcome the establishment of the National Water Forum, and I'm privileged to sit on that. But we feel that it hasn't been fully integrated into the decision-making process. And so I welcome the Minister recognising the forum earlier and the importance of it and its important role and how it needs to be, well, I feel it needs to be taken more notice of. We don't see the recommendations from the forum making their way into government policy. There's also still a lack of transparency. There's a good few different committees and bodies, regional operational committees, technical advisory groups have been set up. I don't even remember the names of all of them, but we don't really know exactly what decisions they're making, who sits on them, and where the sort of chain of decision making sits. There has been, moving on then to the more community level, away from the national level, there has been support for catchment groups and rivers trusts, but it's modest, and there's still no programme for integrating local communities into real decision making about their local river, bay, lake or bay in those catchment management plans that the Minister and David mentioned earlier. And so SWAN's recommending that there needs to be accessible information and really effective, meaningful engagement in decision making. And that really translates into being in compliance with the Aarhus Directive, which we don't believe that the current system is, even in relation to basic access to information. We also want public engagement in the finalisation of those 46 catchment management plans, and we'd love to see the National Water Forum's inputs you know, which we work very hard on, and we've got great staff and we're coming up with very good material, but it's not, we feel it's not being taken on board. And then in relation to agriculture, I guess this is the biggest issue. You'll have seen from the chart, and David highlighted it very well earlier, how significant a pressure this is. It's the predominant pressure and affects 62% of our impacted water bodies. Unfortunately, again, as David highlighted earlier, the number of water bodies impacted has actually increased by nearly a quarter since the last cycle. That's linked to an increase in the national herd and dairy cow increases, and I'm sure that might just come up in our questions and answers and discussion later, and that's very well documented in EPA data, and that's just a quote from a recent EPA report about nitrogen emissions going up. Unfortunately, we don't think the plan is strong enough. It relies very heavily on CAP and the Nitrates Action Programme. Two initiatives around which we have very serious concerns. That would be nearly a separate webinar, but I am going to say a little bit about the Nitrates Action Programme, and it presumes a continuation of the Agri-Food Strategy 2030, and the Environmental Pillar, IEN, SWAN, Stop Climate Chaos have all come out very strongly as civil society against the Agri-Food Strategy because of the threats it poses to water, in addition to biodiversity, climate, air and soil. So then this is almost like a little mini case study on the, you know, getting into the detail of agriculture to whet your appetite. What do we see as being wrong with the Nitrates Action Programme? First of all, there's a continuation of the nitrates derogation without any provision for an assessment of the potential impact on water before a derogation is granted to a farm. There's no curtailment of intensification in vulnerable catchments. So in catchments where we know that agriculture is the main pressure and it's creating an impact, there's still no measure to in any way manage the impact or to curtail intensification in those catchments. There is, of course, voluntary initiatives, and there is a programme of advisors working with farmers, and I do acknowledge that. The draft River Basin Management Plan does say that there's going to be tighter controls on the use of chemical N, but there's no detail on how that's going to be done. If anybody's interested in any further detail on that, please contact the SWAN office. We've done quite a detailed submission on it. And so our recommendations would be that there has to be a water framework directive specific status assessment for intensive farms. In particular, if stocking rate is going to be increased. And, you know, the reality is that certain catchments or subcatchments are going to have to be zoned as ineligible for intensification above certain stocking rates. And what does that mean in practice? What we're recommending is licensing system for intensive dairy farms like there is for pigs and poultry. And then nitrates derogations, we think should no longer be granted unless it can be demonstrated that it can be granted without it compromising the water quality in that catchment. Then moving on to urban wastewater, we were really dismayed actually by the River Basin Management Plan in relation to urban wastewater, because where agriculture is a sticky wicket in relation to, you know, the economic elements of it, and it's in a different government department. Wastewater is in the same department, and so one would think it should be quite straightforward. But in actual fact, well, the first thing it does is that it identifies that there's about 210 water bodies where wastewater pollution is the key pressure. That is why the water is failing and is unhealthy. And yet it has no specific measures to fix that, and no measures to, you know, to heal those waters, for want of a better word. And the reason why is that Irish Water's investment programme is not aligned with the River Basin Management Plan. They have a new investment programme which is going to be in development in the coming months up to 2029. And there's no commitment in the plan that those 210 polluted water bodies are going to be in that investment plan so that they're fixed. And so the flip side of our complaint then, I guess, or very heavy criticism of this, is that the Irish Water Investment Plan absolutely must include measures to address the pollution in these 210 waters as a bare minimum. I mean, there is a lot more water bodies that are polluted by wastewater. These 210 are the ones where the problem is primarily and solely urban wastewater. And our members have lots of anecdotal evidence of lots of smaller streams and rivers that are also polluted. So for us, this is an absolute bare minimum, and it may require additional investment from the state. And so in that case, I'm delighted to hear the Minister say that this is, you know, that water is a priority for the Taoiseach, and I do think this is going to become a political issue. Then in relation to physical modifications, this is very much related to the planning, integrated with the planning system as well. So there's new legislation proposed, very good news in the plan, but there's no details. So it's very difficult for us actually to offer a critical analysis of it. There's going to be new, as David outlined, a new act and new legislation, controlled activities on water, and then there's going to be amendment to planning development legislation, bringing new water and planning guidelines. So that's very much to be welcomed. I have to also note, and I don't wish to put a damper on things, that this has been legally required since 2012, and we're being chased by the Commission on it. So we're being dragged kicking and screaming into having that. And then also, despite ongoing damage that a lot of our, I'm sure, attendees would be familiar with, the only reference to arterial drainage is under the section on exemptions or heavily modified water bodies designation, which is a special designation, which means that the waters don't have the same exacting requirements as other water bodies, although they do still have to meet certain standards. So our recommendation in this arena is that there should be a Water Framework Directive specific assessment, something like an EIA, but separate from EIA, in advance of all developments and projects that might impact water bodies. So anything like dredging, drainage, any kind of maintenance, anytime you see a digger, we're saying that should be assessed in advance. And I'd like to add here, and it should be in the slide because it's very important, is if it's assessed that it will have an impact on the Water Framework Directive status, then that should not be going ahead unless you know, certain exemptions can be implied, for example, and these have to be very strict, like overriding public interest. I'm thinking maybe of you know, an abstraction for a town that where their, you know, their water supply is very much on a knife's edge, for example. You could see some arguments for that. We're also calling for a review of the Arterial Drainage Act to look at the impact of all of this ongoing drainage works and clearance works by the OPW, with the possibility of a revocation of it to remove the requirement to carry on that drainage. And we're calling also for a cessation of wetland drainage, a complete cessation of wetland drainage by the OPW and on agricultural land, and the implementation of a national restoration programme for wetland, which would deliver massively for climate change and biodiversity as well. And both David and the Minister recognise the importance of those measures that were win-wins, and I think that one is probably would be the biggest one for all of those different areas. I've three more issues I'd like to raise. The plan, we feel, is very weak on forestry. There's no new measures proposed, so there's a kind of an implicit kind of acceptance in the plan that, you know, everything is going really well with forestry, and we just and I've just included this quote because it kind of illustrates that the tenure of that section continue to seek improvements in the license application process. So it's I think wishy-washy is probably the word I'd use for that. It's not a very scientific word for that section. So what we're recommending to unwishy-washy it is that there needs to be a requirement that every planting and felling license must contain site-specific conditions, including assigning site-specific setback distances, which we don't currently have, and taking into account a catchment-wide assessment of cumulative impacts. And that, I think, can happen as part of, or it needs to be taken account of as part of a landscape management approach, which I know the Minister and the government are looking at. And the other thing we're very much calling for is a complete cessation of afforestation on upland peat acid-sensitive catchments. I don't know why this hasn't happened. There was a huge piece of research done a couple of years ago by the EPA that called for that. A team of eminent scientists recommended it, and I mean, it's a big question mark as to why that happened. And then my second last issue that I want to highlight is high status waters. David brought these up already and rightly, you know, highlighted them as very important. They're our most pristine rivers, lakes and bays, and they're like the refuges for our most endangered species like freshwater pearl mussels. They're in rapid deterioration, and yet the plan, in the plan, only 2/3 of our water bodies, our high status waters, are in priority areas for action. Now, it does say, as David said, that there is going to be a detailed work plan, and we're looking forward to seeing that. And we hope that every single high status water is going to have, as we're recommending here, targeted catchment management plans for all those water bodies to bring them up to good status. And then on coastal and transition waters, this is an easy one to do analysis on. It's required in the Water Framework Directive, which covers us out to 1 nautical mile, completely omitted from the plan, no measures whatsoever. So our recommendation on that is, please add a chapter. We need a dedicated section covering coastal and transitional waters and identifying all the pressures. And it's not just about the nutrients flowing out of the rivers. There's very specific pressures like aquaculture, hydraulic dredging, offshore renewable energy, shipping, seaweed harvesting, that are all issues which affect, the Water Framework Directive remit, and the plan is silent on them. And we very much need to see integration with Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Marine Spatial Planning, and also marine protected areas, so that we can get the benefits and see where they overlap, because there is a lot of measures that would tick boxes for all of those. And then, so in summary, the plan as it stands, as far as we're concerned, will fail to achieve its aim of restoring our waters to healthy status by 2027, and we're going to fail our obligations under the Water Framework. So what do we need to remedy that? We need measures that will bring all our waters up to a healthy state by 2027, except for a few limited objections. That's what's legally required. We want water status specific assessment for all intensive farms, and zoning vulnerable catchments as ineligible for intensification, licensing of intensive dairy, and no derogations whatsoever unless no impact on water quality can be clearly demonstrated. In relation to sewage pollution, the investment plan needs to include upgrades to fix at a bare minimum those 210 polluted water bodies which are have inadequately treated sewage pumping into them. We want a ban on wetland drainage, national wetland restoration programme. We strongly recommend a cessation of afforestation on peat soils and acid sensitive catchments, urgent catchment plans for all our most pristine high status waters, and then integration with coastal and transitional waters to identify those pressures and come up with measures for those as well. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry I went over.
Thanks, Sinead. Yeah, thanks for stopping the sharing as well. Okay, so we're going to move into the official Q&A now. While we have the Minister, I thought it might be good, Minister, if you're still with us, because I know Mark Boyden had a follow-up point on the question he raised. He said, I'm looking for more practical manifestations of adequate resourcing. For example, how about a Law Pro community water officer for each of the 46 hydrometric catchments rather than the current dozen or so? This would at least up the game with engagement and awareness actions. So I was wondering if you wanted to comment on that response, or David, either one. Yeah.
I might ask David to come in, but only to say it's a fair point, and certainly in terms of the engagement process, that's something we know and are conscious of, and we know there are a number of river trusts and other community-based initiatives taking place throughout the country that we want to put supports in place for as well. So David might elaborate on it a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I suppose it's just on the concrete examples of resource allocations. I suppose in the 6-month period, we're not standing still. We're continuing to work on the plan itself and other aspects supporting around the plan. But one of the initiatives that we have initiated with the CCMA, so that's the City and County Management Association. So the collection of all the local authorities is a business case to look at the resources at local authority level for all of the different natural water functions that local authorities have to carry out. So that's looking at everything from private drinking water supplies to farm inspections to urban areas, to all of the different things that local authorities are being asked to do. And particularly now that some of the local authority water staff, there's a negotiation on at the moment around setting up Irish Water as a standalone utility. So that would foresee staff that moving across to Irish Water and that becoming a standalone utility. But that obviously leaves issues within local authorities around, particularly if that team was involved in what we'll loosely call Water Framework Directive work and water services work. I know it's not quite that simply to disentangle. So that business case has already started. It will take about 18 months, but we're expecting early phases of that to make recommendations, and that will then need to be considered obviously by government. But I suppose just in a very tangible way, that's a resource business case that we're looking at the moment with each local authority. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Minister. So I'm going to start with a question from Pádraig Fogarty. This is for the department, but obviously, Minister, if you'd like to come in as well, or Sinead, you're more than welcome to do so. Can you elaborate on the intention to designated rivers subject to arterial drainage as highly modified water bodies? Is this a bureaucratic stroke to avoid restoration of these river systems?
That's the end of the question, is it, Karen?
That's the end of the question.
Yeah. A nice easy one. A nice easy one to start.
Exactly, nice soft one for you, David.
And that added to wishy-washy, and I see it's called DAFT, the DAFT River Basin Management Plan on the thing. So I'm feeling under pressure. No, it is not. I'm
pretty sure that was a typo. I'm positive that was a typo. Just for the record to clarify.
It certainly isn't a stroke. So heavily modified, to explain to people, so heavily modified water bodies. So the directive allows designation of water bodies as heavily modified or artificial where that's appropriate. And I suppose that's the key phrase, where that's appropriate. Artificial, it speaks for itself, canals, ornamental lakes, things like that. Heavily modified is where there's been such modifications that it's going to be, the water body is unable to meet the requirements of the directive. So because of the human intervention in that water body, and the designation, recognizes the reality of what's, what exists, and I suppose I would disagree that it's a dilution. You still have very significant standards to meet even on those heavily modified water bodies. What's happening at the moment is Ireland has probably the lowest proportion of heavily modified water body designations across Europe. Maybe not the lowest, but certainly we're on the lower end. The EPA are doing a technical review of all water bodies to see should that change, and that work is underway at the moment, and we'd expect it to be out shortly, and it'll be subject to public consultation. So that's a technical review. Once that technical review is complete, the designation itself is a function that rests with the minister. So the minister and the department will look at the technical review that's done by the EPA, if there's economic assessment that needs to be done, and make a decision as to whether that designation will, and taking into account the results of the public consultation, which we would hope would be, as I say, in the next couple of weeks, but coincident with the end of the consultation period on the River Basin Management Plan. So look, it's a designation that's there. It's provided for under directive. It recognises that there has been human intervention and human activity with water bodies, but I would disagree that it's a lowering of the bar. There's still very, very high standards that apply even to those heavily modified water bodies. I'm sure Sinead will have a view on this as well, so I'd be interested to hear Sinead's view on it. But it's not a fait accompli, it's not a stroke. It's something that's actually been done at arm's length from the department. In terms of the technical review, we're interested to see the outcome of that. But I would expect the number of heavily modified water bodies to increase. What falls in and out of that, remains yet to be seen. I haven't seen the outcome of that review yet. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, David. Well handled under pressure, as you say. Sinead, did you want to come in on that point as well?
Yeah, I suppose to welcome the fact that there is going to be a consultation, and we hope it won't be too technical to put people off. I suppose I would challenge, I'm not technically, I don't have a very technical understanding of this, but I would ask the question. David said that, if water bodies are unable to meet their obligation of the directive, Well, my understanding would be that in a lot of cases, those rivers that are drained, it's very much the kind of constant scraping every 6 years and the clearance of the channel that is making them compromise. And, you know, they'd be very resilient and able to bounce back. And I question the fact that they wouldn't be able to meet the obligations under the directive if that maintenance stopped. I could imagine that they could become very healthy and thriving ecosystems again.
I could just clarify there, Karen, quickly.
Yeah, sure, okay. Of course.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's a really good example. So if it was heavily modified for the purpose of, you know, drainage or whatever, and the decision was made to continue that and was designated as heavily modified, you would have to justify the level of intervention for that specific purpose. And that might mean a change in, you know, the type or nature or frequency of intervention. And you have to, you know, bring the water body to the best, I suppose, quality that you can achieve, obviously while maintaining whatever the reason is for the physical intervention. So it could be, you know, a hydroelectric dam, it could be, you know, arterial drainage, whatever that is. But it's, again, it's still a very high bar. So it certainly wouldn't, it's not an exemption in the same way as maybe some other allowances or exemptions under the directive are. But look, I think it's probably worth a session in itself. It's one of those areas that certainly needs a lot of discussion and can get complex.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, David, and thanks for coming in on that, Sinead, as well. So someone has asked, the Arterial Drainage Act 1945 and a lot of works by the OPW and Waterways Ireland are having serious negative impacts on our catchments. Why is this allowed to continue? So I think if either the Minister or David wanted to comment first, that would be great, or Sinead, if you wanted to provide some input, but we don't know the answer to the question, I think is the main thing from our point of view as civil society.
Yeah, well, look, that's quite a sweeping statement, and certainly wouldn't comment on that. But just in terms of, I suppose it's really hydromorphology is what I guess that person is talking about there, and you know, again, we're back to arterial drainage, maintenance of drainage channels, and so on and so forth. So it's probably related to our previous discussion, and it's around appropriate and sensitive intervention. I mean, the arterial drainage is put in place for you know, for a reason, and it's the appropriate maintenance of that in a way that's sensitive to the Water Framework Directive is a legal necessity. So I think that's what we have to do, and I know that the OPW are very live to these responsibilities. So I certainly wouldn't agree with the sweeping nature of the statement, but there's certainly heavy obligations there. And look, as we have recognised in the plan, we're going to come back and look at the legislation and see that it's all fit for purpose, and if it needs to be enhanced in any way, we will do that. I've committed to do that as part of the plan. And that's right across all areas, not specific to arterial drainage.
Yeah. Thanks, David. That is, I think, the beauty of a democracy is that we may not agree with what's said, but certainly we respect their right to say it. Minister or Sinead, would you like to come in on that point?
I'll allow Sinead to come in there, if that's okay. I have nothing more to add than David's comments.
I've been involved in lots of conversations with other sectors about arterial drainage, and it can become quite heated. The history, well, I probably shouldn't go into the history of it, but the legacy of it was that it was to support agricultural production, so we'd be self-sufficient, after the war, and it supported, more productive lands. So wetlands were drained to provide, productive fields, quote unquote. So, the state is now spending a lot of money on that arterial drainage program to keep private land, in production for private means, I guess, or for private profit, for want of a better word. And so there is massive resistance from the agriculture lobby to any threat or to any hint at ceasing land drainage, because it would mean that, you know, productive fields might become wet and they might be productive, for example, all year round. So it's a very political issue, and there's, you know, sort of vested interests lobbying hard against it. That would be one of the things I'd highlight.
Thanks, thanks, Sinead. So I'd like to move on to a question around citizen science. So there's a couple of questions about these and a couple of points in the chat. If the environment is in such trouble, why is there no funding to develop citizen science? And that's Sean from Open Litter Map. 15 years now without any single opportunity to develop citizen science in Ireland. So that's open to our panelists to come on.
I might just mention the local authority waters program, LawPro, have a community waters fund, which is funded through our department. And I know that I can't give the figures right now, but the intent is to increase that funding. It's just that the allocations haven't been made, so to increase that funding again year on year for 2022. So we're very glad and thankful that that money has been made available, and that's available for community groups, for citizens to make applications, to you know, carry out local initiatives. You know, it's supported Rivers Trust, it's supported local projects, and so on and so forth. So it's an application process. The details are on the LawPro website, and I can certainly provide details afterwards in terms of the specific links. And LawPro also have produced you know, very good material about accessing funds, not only through their own community water fund, but through other mechanisms to help with community groups, you know, get up and running and do what's needed. So that's certainly something we're encouraging in terms of community involvement, and you know, where the projects are right, that they can be funded through that fund at a local level. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
I might come in, Karen, on that as well, because you know, certainly I would have been involved in a number of citizen science initiatives down the years, be they monitoring of species, top entrance bats, or of invasive species removal on riverbanks, or and our own, you know, Norvision, who have been doing really good work around citizen science awareness and just kick sampling and etc. All of those have been supported at a local level, I think. So there are funds in place, as David has said, through LawPro, the Community Waters Fund. There's the Local Authority Biodiversity Action Fund from our department as well. I announced 1.5 million in that. In a number of weeks, there'll be the Community Climate Action Fund. That's 20 million a year. That will include some biodiversity and other. It's much broader than just a narrow scope of climate. So I think there's a recognition of value of citizen science across not just the River Management Plan, around the other integrated plans around biodiversity as well, and at local level as well. So I think you know, we certainly see the value of citizen science in the collective actions that we have to take over the next decade and beyond. Thanks.
Thank you. Sinead, did you want to come in on the citizen science point? No, okay. So this is a question for David Flynn. Our groundwater bodies are mostly of good status, but for nitrates, this is based only on drinking water standards. If the work on risk of groundwater contribution to poor estuarine water quality followed through to groundwater body status, what proportion of groundwater bodies would be at poor status? So this is from someone who says they're concerned that the present rules for status give us a false sense of security in relation to our groundwater quality.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head what the proportion would be, but there's certainly a lot more groundwater bodies above 25. So between that cohort between 25 and 50, and with increasing trends. So look, it's an area of concern for us, and particularly that brings in not only the you know, as you head closer to the 50, the issue then becomes not just a water framework directive issue, but it becomes a drinking water issue in private wells and water supplies and so on and so forth. So it's the increasing trends that we're concerned about. In terms of the specific question of what proportion would fall in, I'd need to go back and look at the data, but we can do that.
Okay, thanks, David. Would anyone else like to come in on that point in particular? Okay. There's a question here around, is there a plan to extend the Water Framework Directive to headwaters, small streams and ponds, given that it currently does not apply? So I'll open this up to anyone on the panel.
Yeah, so I mean, the directive applies to all waters. There's obviously a de minimis that comes in there, but your basic measures and basic protections apply to all waters. So, you know, requirement to require permission before you do something, the chemical inputs into waters, prevention of pollution, and so on and so forth. So I'm not entirely sure, is it to do with the definition of water bodies and so on and so forth, but I mean, there has been a full fitness check of the directive by the Commission, and they decided not to reopen the directive. So there isn't, I suppose, in direct response, there isn't an immediate plan to change the directive at Commission level. Some of the subsidiary directives and specific directives are being changed. So the Urban Wastewater Directive is under review at the moment. The Bathing Water Directive is under review. They were looking at the Groundwater Directive, but I don't think they're changing it. The Sewage Sludge Directive is under review. So there's quite a lot of the specific subsidiary directives are under review, but not the Water Framework Directive itself. Now, it was found fit for purpose. But the basic measures and the basic protections apply to all waters.
Okay, thanks. Would any of our other, yeah, Sinead, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, we are kind of tied, as David said, by the definitions in the directive, but I wouldn't, and because we have so many small lakes in Ireland, there are a lot of lakes that aren't designated because the threshold in the directive is so many, I actually can't remember how many hectares, but it's quite large by Irish standards. But I mean, I think, to be honest, that's the least of our worries. You know, every small lake is part of river catchment. And if we, if sponsored recommendations were taken on board for rivers, then that would, by association would look after those water bodies. But I do think that everything doesn't have to be about, exactly the Water Framework Directive, because a lot of SWAN members are very committed to the value of those small streams and small ponds, and they can be very much part of integrated water management anyway, because they will help, for example, through a restoration program. Because if you support the establishment of small ponds, for example, in particular areas on farms, it will help to attenuate pollution. So they have lots of roles, and they don't necessarily have to have, a legal requirement under the directive to play a strong role.
Thanks, Sinead. So another question is, given the rapid deterioration of high status waters, waiting 6 years for results from a small scale experiment seems far too long, particularly when measures to improve water quality like setbacks, animal fencing, and riparian buffers are already well known. Would any of our panelists like to comment on that question?
I keep going first, Karen. I hope that's okay. I can come in on that if that's okay. Yeah.
Please do.
Yeah, we're not waiting 6 years. So there's a whole, I suppose, range of things that we're doing, both indirectly through CAP and the measures there, but also through what's called the Blue Dots program, which the local authority waters program operate, which looks specifically at high status objective water bodies. So that's all going on in any case. So this is really above and sitting on top of all of those measures, and will in real time inform how we go about those measures. So I'd very much see the Waters of Life project adding and building capacity in protecting those high status objective water bodies, not we're not waiting for the outcome of it. It will have the outcomes as we go, but it's also just one of I suppose a whole suite of measures that are happening in those areas. But they are complex catchments, and I suppose we do need projects like the Waters of Life to understand, what is the best way to go about protecting and restoring those areas. And again, look, I think it's going to only add to the process as opposed to holding anything up, for sure. And certainly, I think once, sorry, I just, before we move on there, and certainly once the project is launched and up and running, I'd very much welcome the opportunity for myself and maybe the project manager and Gagan to come back and speak to you in detail about it.
Thanks very much. Sinead, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I guess we're running short on time, but so I would just say I would share the questioner's concern about the timelines. These are really vulnerable catchments, and they're deteriorating at such a fast rate that I do think there needs to be an element of severe urgency injected, especially into the most vulnerable ones, with freshwater permafrost.
Yeah, I think we have time probably for one more question, and I think this really brings us nicely into the next step, which is the follow-up and consultation. But I suppose with regards to members of the public making a submission, is it possible to get examples from the last Water Framework Directive cycle or the current River Basin Management Plan where submissions made by the public made it into the final draft? One of the questions that we get a lot of from our members and members of the public is, what happens when we make a submission? How can we never, how can we might not see an impact of those submissions?
I might let David come in, but just generally, just in relation to public submissions, and we say this for this or the process around the expert report on the marine protected areas. We do take these submissions very seriously. They are processed and synthesized within the department. I think it's quickly, we're very conscious of, and a lot of the conversations we've been continuing to have are around meaningful engagement, participation. I alluded to it in my own opening contribution, and we are quite committed to that. So I think I can't speak for previous plans, but I can certainly say that from our perspective, there's a deep commitment here, and I think we've given it at the outset here, and David has as well, around the importance of that engagement and how we value it, how we value events like this evening as well. Because we are taking on board the contributions of members of the public and the ENGOs and all stakeholders. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Minister. David, did you want to come in?
Yeah, very little to add. The Minister set out very clearly there. I'll just give one example. The 46 catchment management plans was a direct result of engagement with with stakeholders. So I think that's just one example. We do take it very seriously, and we have to account to the Minister and others as to what responses have come in as consultation, and assess them and make recommendations. So they are all taken extremely seriously. Obviously we'll get a range of views and different views, and we have to take that into account as well. Thanks.
Okay. I just want to, I think that's about all the time we have for questions this evening. I'm sorry we didn't quite get through all of them. I want to thank the Minister and David and Sinead and everyone who submitted a question. I hope you found that an engaging, interesting discussion. I certainly, I did. I found it really interesting. So thank you, and thank you for your candor as well to the Minister and to David. Sinead, I'm going to hand it back to you now to talk about next steps and what people who want to get involved in SWAN's campaign and in the public consultation process can do from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Sorry, I just have to do my usual fiddling around with my slides. To get to next steps, here we are. Oops. There we go. So thank you for a very interesting discussion. I'm sorry we didn't get to discuss agriculture. That would have really given us a very added to the colour of it. So I just want to talk about next steps now, because I think we've highlighted a lot of issues. Obviously, you know, we've had an exchange of views. David and I don't, you know, see eye to eye on everything, obviously. And so what Swan is going to be doing next, and I hope you join us in our endeavours, is we're going to, you know, take the comments from this evening, and also we're having our own internal discussions about what our priority asks are for what we need to see in the campaign. And, you know, we'd love some of the people who attended here this evening to get involved in that. We have as you'll see from my presentation, we have a very clear idea of what what we would like to see in the plan. But we're probably going to prioritise those down, you know, even more, and look forward to engaging further with David and his team to convince them of the merit of it, so that we see a plan that, as we see it, would be effective and would achieve the targets of the directive. So what can the people here do? What we're doing is we're asking you to consider adding Swan's asks, as we outlined them this evening, into your submission on the draft River Basin Management Plan. In the first instance, please make a submission on the draft River Basin Management Plan, and if you do, add Swan's considerations to it. And the more people that do that, obviously, the more chance. Block your ears for the strategizing, David. The better chance we have of getting them into the final plan. David's the man you have to convince, along with many more of his colleagues, and I know he's very open to our
team effort.
Yeah. And so there's two options for action. If you'd like to participate, we're going to have a kind of a tool whereby you'll be able to do a kind of a click and submit on our top 3 to 5 asks. And then if you're very interested, we're going to provide some resources to help people make a deeper submission, where we go into more in the detail of the issues. And what can you do to kind of keep in touch? Then please follow our social media and visit our website. And also, we are going to run another workshop. We don't have the date yet, but we'll give more details on the campaign and how you can help and how you can get involved. And some of the issues that came up were quite technical this evening, and we're going to have some more experts at that workshop to help you understand the detail of the plan. And if anything came up and if your question wasn't asked this evening, please do email us, info@swanireland.ie, or send us a message on social media, and we'll do our very best to answer it. If we can't, David, I'm sure you'd be willing to help out if there's any follow-up questions that people would like to have answered. So thank you very much, everybody, and I'll hand you back to Karen to close out.
Thanks a million. David, just I do have one more question that I feel would be remiss if we didn't ask, and that's on the CAP. As we know, Ireland is developing its CAP strategic plan. Can you comment on how the new River Basin Management Plan will address water quality in the south and east, where water quality is deteriorating from agricultural pressure? So in particular, what's the plan to restore freshwater pearl mussel populations in SACs in the south and east? And I'm sorry for coming in after I'm sure you thought we were finished with you. I do apologize, David, but it is a question that I think, because we haven't really got to talk about agriculture tonight, despite the fact that we, in both of the presentations, we cited it as such a big pressure. Is that okay with you to answer or try to cover tonight?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot in that question. So
I know.
Very briefly, I guess, do I think of it as almost like a pyramid? So we've got the basic requirements under good agricultural practice regulations, so the nitrates action plan, and that applies to all farms, and that will be strengthened under the new nitrates action program. So that will bring new requirements across all farms into how fertilizers, organic and inorganic and all of that, are all managed. So that we hope will translate into a better water quality. On derogation farms then, which are a subset, there's stricter requirements. And again, there's stricter requirements, environmental requirements applying to those farms. CAP then is for people receiving payments, the basic payment scheme, and that comes with certain basic conditions, or it's called GAIAC, which you have to. Well, one of them is to comply with GAP, and there's other ones that you have to comply with. There's eco schemes, which under what's called Pillar 1, which people can sign up to, and that again should add a further level of benefit to those people that have signed up to that. And then there's Pillar 2, which is, I suppose, more targeted into certain areas and is probably more, would be of more benefit in terms of purely water quality for phosphorus areas or areas of phosphorus risk. And it's called the AECM, so it's the Agricultural, Environmental, Climate Measure. And that will apply to certain risk areas. So all of those layer up together, and we should see, we hope that it will translate into better water quality, and that's certainly the plan. And I think, and it's more by accident than everything else, we've had an alignment of the preparation of the River Basin Management Plan, the preparation of the new Nitrates Action Programme, and the preparation of the CAP Strategic Plan altogether. It's made for an extraordinarily busy year for colleagues in agriculture, for ourselves, and for our colleagues in heritage. But I've seen more collaboration and discussion between departments on those three plans because they were happening together than I have experienced previously. So I think that was, hopefully has ended up with stronger, I'm not saying they're perfect, but at least they're stronger policy positions on each of those issues. So I'm not quite sure I touched on all of it. Again, that's probably a whole webinar in itself, Karen, but hopefully that gave you some view. Thanks.
There's an idea for our next webinar. I think it would be an interesting one, looking at agriculture and water. Yeah, I can't see, I'm not convinced that, you know, that the issue, the measures I set out in CAP are going to address the issue, especially in the areas that the questioner identified in the south, because we have such elevated nutrient levels, and without bringing down the number of livestock and the amount of effluent that's going on the land, I can't see how we can bring the effect of it down. Let's carry on that conversation at a future.
Thanks, David, for taking that late question. And thanks to everybody who've attended this evening. We're going to save the chat and save the Q&A. We'd very much like to, wherever as possible, as Sinead said, follow up on these on the points raised, either in social media or in another way, if we can. So I know Sinead has given lots of information about how to get involved in the campaign, how to make our voices heard on this really important plan. I'd like to thank David. A special thanks to the Minister, who I know had to go. And thanks so much, Sinead, to Swan for having us here this evening. Good night, everyone.
Karen and David, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
No problem. Good night, all.